Welcome back to Divide or We Fail, a front porch political chat podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that sits right at the heart of our democracy: voter ID laws and voter suppression. With elections around the corner, conversations about who gets to vote and how are more pressing than ever. Supporters of voter ID laws argue they're essential for election integrity, while critics warn that these measures risk disenfranchising marginalized communities. But what does the data show? Who's impacted? What are the solutions that balance security with access? In this episode, we're going to sift through the facts, the history, the different viewpoints on the issue. We're here to unpack the complexities of voting access and voter suppression, and we invite you to join us as we explore how we can safeguard the democratic process without leaving anybody behind. So grab a seat on the porch and let's dive into this critical discussion on the balance between voting security and voting rights. All right, gentlemen, we're at it as usual on Tuesday. I don't know why I sound like a robot. Anyway, so we're gonna talk voter IDs, voter suppression, and the election that is happening in 7 days. Early voting, I think in New York started last week, but today's like
26th. 9 days, I think, is
October
what it is.
26th. Yeah, so but like today was like early vote day. I don't know if you got all those alerts on social media, but like it's official early vote day. Like, you want to get out the vote. So that being said, we're going to talk about voting, this super fun topic that everybody loves to talk about, and the ways that it might not be as easy for some as it is for others. So first things first, are you guys aware of how the ACLU rates the difficulty of voter ID?
I am not aware of the ways in which the rating system for that.
Yeah, so there's like, it's like there's three scales. The worst being required ID, and with that required ID, you have to if you don't have it, you're not able to cast a supplemental or preliminary ballot. The middle case would be requires an ID but allows you to do a signed affidavit as your ballot if you don't have your ID on you. And then there's actually four. So the second to lowest is doesn't require photo ID but does require some form of ID. So you can use like a social security card or a birth certificate. And then the lowest form is just verifying your address that's on file and matching up signatures, which is what New York State does. So you guys, I assume that you are at least somewhat familiar with at least those tiers of restriction to most restrictive to least restrictive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I muted myself because I was typing. Okay. So the big thing, and I know that James, I think we end up on, I don't want to say either side of the aisle here, but I think that we're on different wavelengths when it comes to this topic, and I could be wrong. I could be totally assuming who you are as a person. But I assume that you come out on the pro ID end.
Very much so.
Okay, so I'm going to give you, while I'm pulling up all of my articles and things, I'm going to give you the floor to kind of just give us your stance on this and where you're coming from.
So with voter ID, it's one of those things where an ID is such a big part of living your life, essentially. Jobs require you to have an ID. Buying alcohol ID, buying tobacco ID, buying nicotine ID, getting a driving a car ID. There's so many things that you have to do in the world that you are required an ID, and I believe that it's really not too much to ask to present that when voting. And even if so, I don't. I want to let's get this out of the way first. Trump lost in 2020. I'm not arguing that. He lost. It is what it is. But there's questions about there it create like him espousing his beliefs. It creates questions of why is this happening? There are weird things that happened in the last election. I think we can all agree to that. But I think if you just having somebody give their ID when they're voting, it takes away a lot of the questioning. It takes away any iota of a doubt, I guess, in my mind, that the elections weren't rigged or stolen or fair. They're fair.
Right.
And I just don't think it's too much of an ask. And I see a lot of the arguments of the voter IDs being racist. Um, I just feel like those claims in alone itself are racist, if that makes sense. So
I would, if you could elaborate just a bit.
yeah, so Kathy Hochul,
Our
let me
favorite.
pull up the exact quote. No, it's not the word I would use. Um,
I mean, it was. I don't know if my tone came across, but I'm.
so where's the exact quote? I had it. Hold on.
Can I ask you a question while you're looking?
Yeah, absolutely.
You support the United States Constitution, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly.
Oh, yeah, wholeheartedly.
Okay.
Um, damn it, I can't find the actual quote now. But um she made reference, like, the way she said it was people in inner cities don't know how to use computers, and black people don't have the ability to get IDs and stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening and I'm like, I can see the point she's trying to make, but it's not true. In New York City alone, there's DMVs all over the place. And I understand the cost may be a problem. Okay, but would the cost, if we're going to actually implement voter ID laws, make it free. It doesn't cost that much for New York State to print an ID.
Preach.
Um,
I agree
make
with
it
that.
make it available so you can do it. You can sign up for it and stuff online. Because I'm not saying you need a picture ID, but a voter ID, your name, and you have to give them your social security number.
Yeah.
So now you make that free, make it available to do online. Now you have access covered. You have um, cost covered. There's no excuse why we can't do that.
Can I pause you there real quick? Travis, do
Yeah.
any of those voter ID laws require it to be a photo ID?
Uh, yes, the states of Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. The voter must cast on a provisional ballot and take additional steps for it to be counted after Election Day if they do not provide a photo ID. In the states of Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Idaho, Louisiana, Michigan, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Texas, a photo ID is required. However, voters can sign an affidavit attesting to his or her identity to cast their regular vote on Election Day.
So in my perfect world, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yep.
Because like I said before, I'm technically a Republican right now. I'm planning on switching to independent, but I lean right on a lot of things. But I'm not I would be considered a rhino to Republicans because I don't just blindly follow.
Well, modern day Republicans, yeah.
So, perfect world, there's free voter IDs. You get it. You can do it online. They send it to you. You have to give them like your social security number. You have to give them a bunch of your information just to verify that it is in fact you.
Mm-hmm.
And you present that when you go to vote. I don't think it's that big of a task to present that ID. Keep it in your wallet. And guess what? You should take your wallet with you everywhere you go. I mean, do you leave your house without your wallet very often?
No.
Exactly. So you know what I'm saying? Like it's not like it's a foreign concept to, oh, I'm just leaving my wallet at home and going here. I think I've left my house without my wallet like twice in the last 5 years, and both times is because I couldn't find it because the dog stole it and I threw it under the couch. So it's one of those things where there is ways to make it attainable and make it doable and make it better for everybody. But the problem is, again, one side saying no voter IDs, the other side is saying photo ID. You know what I'm saying? Like there's
So,
no moderation in government.
and this
And
So
is this is where, well, I'll let Cody take the floor because he's itching to say something.
so I get that that is your ideal world, but in the current system, do you
Right.
still support the voter ID legislation?
yes. So I think giving an address isn't enough. I can sift through a phone book. I can Google addresses. You know what I'm saying? Like there is so many ways where it can be frauded. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like
you
if
you
I
have to
like
remember you don't just show your address. You've been to vote. You give them your
yeah, no, you
address,
tell them your address.
and then you
Yeah.
have to sign, and they literally hold your signature up next to the signature that they have on file to see if it's you.
Right.
So if you're going to look up
Yeah.
random addresses, you're not going to match that person's signature.
Right.
I can tell you from personal stuff like personal experience, that's the word I was looking for. Hello
Mm-hmm.
English.
Yeah.
I've gone and I've signed and it's been quick and it has looked nothing like my other one and they just don't care.
Sure.
That has happened in New York State.
Yeah.
And
So
and I have not remembered a time in which I voted which I haven't shown a driver's license.
Yeah.
in New York State,
It isn't required
Yeah.
in New York State. It's not.
It
oh,
isn't
But
required, but they do scan it if you have it.
yeah,
they've never asked me for mine. I've never
they're
presented mine to them.
they're not. Well, he's also, you have to remember, he's in Oneida County,
Onondaga.
or
Mhm.
sorry, Onondaga County Board of Elections. So they're probably a little bit better off than the old Jefferson County Board of Elections. So
Well, and there's more people to keep track of. There's
right,
500,000 people that live in my county, and there's like what 40,000 that live in
because
Jefferson County.
yeah, because
Yeah.
in the city, you show up, or actually in the whole county, you show up. There's like a big ass book, and then you split in your line depending on your district. If you're, at least if you're in the city, because the city has multiple districts, and then they have a big long book, a big huge book, and you tell them your name, and then they scroll to your name, and then
Mhm.
they say address, and you give them the address, and then they say sign, and you sign next to your name. Like, it's so that's
Oh, I remember. I remember
yeah,
voting at one point when I lived there.
yeah,
But what they do here in New York State and in a different county,
yeah,
and it's two counties away because Oswego County's in between.
right.
They have iPads and they scan the back of your driver's
Jeez,
license.
what's it like to live in the rich county, dude?
Ha, you're hilarious. Um,
We're lucky if the pen
Considering
works.
the city I the city I live around has the largest lead problem in the country at 70 parts per billion. I don't know that it is the
worse,
rich county.
worse than Flint.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
70 parts per billion. But
Anyways,
aside from that, right, like they scan my driver's license and I then sign the iPad and vote, and that's what they do. And it's no problem for someone like me because I have the access to the resources. I'm not restricted in that way. I can take time off if I need to go to the DMV. The fees for renewing my license are not a big deal, right? I have access to those resources.
mm-hmm.
And I have the ability to take the time off from work because I'm not worried about being fired.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in larger cities where there's more competition, income is not valued the same. and time off is not treated with the same respect. People don't have the time to do that, and people and you brought up New York City, James, and it's a great point. And how many people in New York City actually need a driver's license? How many people there work under the table? All of those things are reasons that people aren't incentivized to get photo IDs.
And this is living in a world where they're not free. So we're talking about current states, because I agree with you, James. I agree with voter ID if the ID is free. I do not think that, because as far as I'm concerned, if the ID isn't free, then you're charging people to vote, and that is like some Jim Crow shit. I'm not for it.
Yeah,
And
no, I'm not.
the
I'm not
ID
saying force people to pay.
Right. No, I know, but I'm just saying
Right.
in the world right now, like if New York State were to switch, like it would never fucking happen. But if New York State were to, for instance, jump to the Georgia statute, right? And the New York State Board of Elections said a photo ID is required. Otherwise, you may not cast your actual ballot. You have to do a provisional ballot, which doesn't get counted until after everything else is counted and they verified your ID. And there is a significant, it's something like 7 to 8% of provisional ballots aren't ever counted. Now, granted, that's
Right.
because the county's called, but like, just imagine how you'd feel if you knew your vote didn't count. So now you have basically put a paywall to voting in the state of New York, because you have to pay the $50 to get an ID. That's the state requirement. And so you can't vote without that ID. And so like right now, if we were to do that, it would be entirely unethical in my opinion. And with that being said, I'll just jump into some stuff that I plucked out of the ether of information. So, people who are proponents of voter ID laws like to point to a specific 2010 study that it's Pastor et al. I didn't actually reference. I didn't read that paper, but I read about 3 other papers that reference this specific paper as a major source for proponents of voter ID restrictions. And the reason for that is that study shows. And it shows it's done ethically, and it shows concurrent election cycles that voter ID restrictions have virtually no impact on turnout. That is true. A Michigan State study in 2020 concurred that opinion by diving into what's called the CCCS, which basically, so I'm sure you guys all know that exit polls are dog shit, because number one, people, for whatever reason, that don't vote like to say they did. I don't know if it's an embarrassment thing to be like, no, I didn't vote. Like, and then you're going to be like, you're going to get dogged by your friends or whatever. But people are much more likely to overestimate their voting. So they're going to say, I did vote and you didn't vote. So then those exit polls become really hard to utilize to judge turnout, because realistically turnout is less than what is coming out. That was a big issue with the 2020 election, is that the exit polls were so far off from what the reality was, because of the fact that the majority of the majority of the ballots counted late were mail-in votes, so people aren't going to show up there. But anyways, I digress. The CCCS is a much more stringent report in which they only poll people who they're able to verify voted. So for instance, the voter rolls come out, somebody says, yes, I voted. They go to the election board and say, hey, in these elections, did this person vote? And then they say yes or no. If that person did, then they qualify for the survey and they move on from there. So that is the information. What's that?
It's the CCES.
CCES, there you go. Do you have the full name for that, just for posterity?
Yep, sure do.
Can you rip it off for me?
Cooperative Congressional Election Study.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you read the same fucking paper I did, because I don't have it in front of me right now. So anyways, and Cody, obviously you have it. You're looking at the same paper I did, so fact check me. But the big thing is that they utilize that because that shows a more accurate picture post vote. So there was a nominal within the margin of error effect on voter turnout. However, that's for the general numbers. What that study, the Pastor et al. Study, did not take into account was socioeconomic factors, and I don't want to say like ethnic divides, but basically they didn't take into account ethnicity. So the Michigan State study elected to specifically dive into, and they analyzed each individual populations. So they did a study on Latinos, they did a study on African Americans, and they did a study on mixed race, and they did a study on Asians. Um, I'm just
Real
gonna,
quick, before you jump into those
yeah,
results, I don't know if either of you have ever worked with someone who's been in jail and or had to then re-get all of their documentation afterwards, but I have in a professional capacity, and the amount of work it takes to get a new social security card, get a new birth certificate, get a new photo ID, which you need one of those things to get all of the rest of those things.
yep. Or in states like Florida, where if you get one felony, you can't vote, which is
Right.
fucking fucked.
Or not to take into account the fact that Puerto Rico is held to federal United States law,
But they can't vote in the general election. They can't
but
vote
they
for
have
president.
zero representation
They have,
in the general election.
yeah, they don't have any representation in the general election. They do have representatives in the House of Representatives, but they do not have a senator. So in essence,
Right.
they are woefully underrepresented, and that goes for Guam as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
But
this,
back to the U.S. citizens who have either been in jail or prison or whatever, or just for some reason ended up with a bad situation,
mm-hmm,
maybe got involved in drugs and lost all of that documentation
mm-hmm.
through getting arrested and didn't get a felony, so they still can vote. The amount of work it takes to get any of those things, because you either have, if you don't have one of those pieces of documentation to get the others, the burden of proof that is put upon you to get those is insane. You have to have a living relative who can vouch for you
Mm-hmm.
with a photo ID. And a lot of times people in those situations either aren't close to family, family doesn't live nearby, or they have no connections, which makes getting any of those things next to impossible without help from lawyers. And then you're getting lawyers help pro bono, which is not easy or readily accessible to find.
Right, and then to piggyback off of that, Cody, and I'm sure that you'll reassert or reaffirm my speculation here, but outside of just criminals, and I don't know why criminals feels derogatory. It's not, but outside of criminals trying to
Outside
get
of people
their
who break the law.
yeah,
Yeah.
criminals trying to get their stuff back after they've done their sentence. There, I would imagine that there would be a significant barrier of entry to people with mental health issues, like severe, like things like schizophrenia or severe anxiety, like things that stop you from being able to necessarily a go into the DMV, or b be in a situation in which you kind of have your shit together enough to be able to present them to a governing body, and use that to exercise your rights.
Yeah. Because realistically, you'd have to have a really cushy situation where you have a family member who's helping you do all that.
Right. And so that all helps paint the picture. And then when assessed in the strict states, so for example, the strictest state in the union is Georgia. Georgia is a state that requires photo ID at the ballot box, and if you do not have photo ID, you must cast a provisional ballot and then take additional steps for it to be counted after election day. So basically, you don't get to vote that day. You have to kind of prove who you are, and then it might get counted toward the county count. It just depends. In a state like that, it was shown that in general elections, the differential in turnout between white voters and Latino voters was, I want to say, something like 6.2%. It's on like page 18, Cody.
I will
And
check that in just a second. The
yeah,
other thing that to note in New York State, if you're a felon, is so long as you've completed your sentence and are no longer imprisoned, you can register to vote again. And many other states, which is not something a lot of people are aware of. I wasn't aware of it until now.
I mean, to be fair, that's how it should be.
Oh yeah, I don't
You know,
disagree with you, but that's
I
not
think
the information we were given as children, and that's not the information we were brought up educated with as well.
no, but I think that's more of a recent thing. I think that's become
Yes, 2021
more.
was the law that allowed it in New York. And you said page
Yeah.
18,
So,
Travis.
I actually have it up in front of
um,
me now, so you're good. I used you
okay.
guys chatting to mute myself.
And rightfully so. I think, if you've gone to prison, served your sentence, you should have that right afforded to you. I mean, while you're in prison, absolutely not. I don't think. I think
Right,
when
but
you
that's
are
the
in
current
prison,
statute in New York is once you leave, you can re-register to vote. But so
yeah,
long
no,
as
I
you
think
are in
that's,
prison, it's not an option.
yeah. I mean, I think if you're in prison, you forfeited all your rights. Um,
What about people who are
once you
wrongfully convicted?
that, and that's what haunts is we do see that. I mean, this is a topic for a whole nother time
Mm-hmm.
because I
Yeah,
could
I
go on
didn't
for
mean
days.
to
Yeah. No,
open
no,
that
no.
box of worms.
No, absolutely. I think the problem with that, like, the hard thing is, so if you open it up, because at that time you don't know who's wrongfully convicted.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, there could be certain things then in like a certain court case where you're like, this is questionable at best. Why is this in? But I think it's one of those things where it's not as common for people to be wrongfully convicted. Um, a lot of people who are convicted, chances are they did it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I always say, like, even when news breaks, I say, hold on a second. Oh, okay. Even when news breaks, I say, wait till we have all the facts. Like, it's it's just hard for me to. I don't want murderers and child molesters. Like, I think once you commit a crime like that, you shouldn't be able to vote. Like, you've given up your human rights. Um, but again, people are wrongfully convicted, and my heart breaks for that. Like, I never want to see that. So it's hard for me to say, okay, we're going to go into this with the thought that everybody who's in prison is wrongfully convicted. You know what I'm saying?
right. And I don't think
Like,
everyone is, and I do think it does disproportionately happen to people of color more than it happens to white folks.
I don't have any statistics or anything like that. I haven't researched into that enough.
Well, right, because it was not
Oh,
today's topic. So
yeah,
Cody's just trying to put you
was
on
not
blast.
prepared. Yeah, that's what he's doing.
no, I'm just trying to
Um,
consider all of the different things that come into effect, and really, an hour is still not enough. But
no,
neither here nor there.
and that's the thing about like topics. Like, I feel like a lot of these topics we're gonna have to have like 2 or 3 part episodes because there's like the voter ID.
Yeah,
I'm pro voter ID. We need to make XYZ.
Yeah.
right.
You know
We
what I'm
need to
saying?
make
Like, it's
access to these things insanely
exactly,
accessible. Like so much so that you could walk down the street going to a Target and get your ID in roughly the same amount of effort.
exactly.
Yeah,
So that's the hard part is like, and I think that's where a lot of, not to bring it back to something else, but a lot of the disconnect in today's political landscape is there's so many moving pieces to every topic that there's just, you can't base you can't base your opinion on somebody else's. I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. You can't make a judgment on a person or a person's beliefs because you don't know the full story. And that's why I think talking and communicating comes out. Because if I just went, hey, I'm pro voter ID, a
you would
lot of
make
people
assumptions.
in their head, they're jumping to, I want everybody to pay $50 for this ID. Actually, I do think you should have to take a test to vote because,
That's your cynicism, though. That's not you being literal.
Right,
yeah, that's just me being on X or Twitter, whatever the hell
Yeah,
it's
that's
called.
that's you seeing what people say out loud.
Yeah,
right.
that's not, that's more cynicism, like Travis said.
Yeah.
But like, if I
Right.
come out and say, "Hey, I'm pro voter ID," I've been called racist. I've been called ignorant. Everybody acts like I'm loaded. Like, I got bills too, guys. I don't make as much as you think I do.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? So, like, there's such a general disconnect between the way politics used to be and the way they are today. And these discussions need to happen.
Right.
And that's why I'm glad we're doing this.
And
So,
there's also the situation where like the general public as a whole just isn't educated enough in the nuance, and I mean that respectfully. Like I'm 100 like this statistic that I'm about to throw at you. I'm 100% certain that you probably didn't know this. So, in
For today, no.
in strict voter ID laws, Latino turnout was 10.3 points lower in states with photo IDs than jeez.
It was 10.3 points lower in
in
states with photo ID
requirements. Yeah, exactly.
than in states without photo ID requirements.
Correct.
For multiracial Americans, it was 12.8 points lower under strict photo ID laws, and they were almost as large as in the primary elections.
Correct. And the other thing, and the thing that stuck out to me the most, is, in my opinion, the people that have just straight up, I don't want to say earned, but that's probably the best word, earned the right to vote, and that's naturalized citizens. For those who do not know what naturalized citizens are, they're people who were not born in this country and then passed the citizen test and became U.S. citizens after moving here. So in states with strict photo IDs, naturalized citizens were 12.7% less likely to vote in general elections. And that makes me really sad because they worked really hard to be able to be a part of our democracy. And the fact that they're so negatively affected by those kinds of things and those kinds of restrictions just makes me feel bad. And I knew going into this, James, that you were pro voter ID and pro voter ID access. So I knew you weren't going to be a fucking dickhead. But I think so. That's going back to the general public in the lack of knowledge. Like you're not thinking in your head that that's even a reality. You think in your head because we all, as much as we try to be open minded, as much as we try to be accepting, we have our own biases, and we can only live life as we've experienced it, and we can try and take as much empathy into account. But if you haven't had that lived experience, it's really, really hard to put yourself in those shoes. And so you don't think there's no way that and I believe this wholeheartedly, that the majority, 99% of Americans are good people. And there's no way that when they hear voter ID that their immediate thought is, cool, I don't want the brown people to vote. That's not what's happening. And they aren't even thinking that that would affect 13% of a demographic to be unable to or unwilling to access our most basic right as Americans. And that's why I think it's important to, and this is a discussion that would have happened very openly back in the day when the two parties, which the two parties would never, I'm not going to do it, but when the two parties would negotiate, because here's what would have happened back in the day. The Republicans would have come in and they would have said, we want voter ID. We want people to show an ID at the polls to prove who they are. And the Democrats would have said, all right, cool, you want to do that? We make the IDs free. And then they go, all right, shake hands, and they move on. Neither side's super happy because now everybody has open access to the documents they need to vote. And the other side is pissed because they have requirements to vote to begin with, right? So, and that's assuming that we're on our razor's edge of left and right.
Yeah.
That's the world we would have lived in. And now we've become so polarized in identity politics that it's just like you said, James. You come out and you say, all the person hears is, I support voter IDs. They wouldn't, in the modern political discourse and the environment that we are not fostering, your typical debate lords, TikTokers, join my TikTok and prove me wrong kind of bullshit. Ever since, who was that motherfucker, by the way? I think this proved me wrong. I don't like that guy. But anyways, you can't prove...
Crowder.
What's that?
Change my mind.
Crowder.
Change my mind.
Yeah, Crowder. Yeah, you can't prove a negative, so fuck that guy. But anyways, ever since that environment, it's people are going to jump right down your throat. You would literally get the words, I support voter ID out, and somebody be like, racist. They really would. And I don't like to do that. I don't like to say that's the world we live in, but it's the reality is that everybody's looking to put everybody in a box, and that's just not the case. And so I think that these specific studies, if people would like to look them up, if you type into Google Michigan State University voter identification laws,
link it in the description.
I will link it in the description, but also I'm just going to tell people how to Google it.
Yeah.
It's sorry, I got the date wrong. It's a January 2016 paper, and it's really really impactful because it really shows that it's not exactly a one trick pony. There's multiple things that go into how voter ID laws affect citizens, and then also I will link a a link to the MIT election lab, which has a report on voter identification. It doesn't really say yes or no on it, but it gives you all the information on which states do. That's where I'm getting all this information on signed affidavits and provisional ballots. It literally has a map that tells you which state you can click on it, and it'll tell you what it does. It goes over HAVA or have a minimum requirements, which that's a whole different story. But either way, it's a plethora of information that can kind of get you started in the conversation with somebody if you want to do what we do and have these conversations with your friends. But yeah, so end of rant. Bringing it back full circle. I just want to hammer home that nothing in this political world, and the reason why we started this podcast is because nothing in the world is black and white. There is so much gray. And so
I would argue most of us live in the gray most of the time.
exactly. Most of us live in the gray. Most of us are center left or center right. We're not fucking, anarchists, and we're also not fascists. But the reality is that policy does have real life effects on people that you might not realize. And someone's not going to come up and straight up say to you, "Hey, dude, I either A, don't really understand how, or B, don't have access to the information, or C, cannot afford to get my ID, ergo, I cannot vote." They're just going to do what the...
People would lie and say they voted.
Exactly. They're just going to go to the exit polls and say, I voted. And then somebody's going to take that number and throw it into the turnout and be like, we had record turnout. No, the fuck you didn't. You didn't.
Right.
Can I just say what we're talking about polls real quick?
Yeah.
Polls are trash. Let me rephrase that. Election polls are trash.
Brody, if you're going to come in here and
Because,
talk shit about Quinnipiac in front of me, I'm going to fight you.
no, I love polls. Just not political ones, like election ones. Because not once have I been asked. You see all these exit polls and all this other shit, and half the time, everything is skewed.
Well, they ask
The
people
only
in
way...
populated counties.
What's that?
I said they ask people in more populated counties than the ones either of us live in.
But yes, but here's the thing.
They're also
So
not asking swing states.
you go to even if you go to populated counties,
Mm-hmm.
your demographics change based on county.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So you can do an exit poll and you can do all the polls you want in New York City. But that don't mean shit because again, it's those demographics where they are.
Well, this is why. Are you familiar with the website 538?
Yes, I like 538.
538 does. It's also 538 and Real Clear Polling are both various. I don't want to say essential, but very useful tools because they do what's called a polling aggregate, which means they're going to take the Rasmussen, they're going to take the New York Times, they're going to take the Quinnipiac, they're going to take the Siena, they're going to take some other bullshit ones that don't make any sense where they have both Trump and Harris up 15 points, and they're going to aggregate them together to give you not a perfect idea, but a general idea of...
They're going to give you an average.
Right. They're going to give you the general idea of where we likely are. Now, we could be really wrong. I mean, James, the 2016 election, the polls were way the fuck off. I'm pretty sure they had Hillary winning by 5%.
Yeah, they had Hillary landslide winning.
Exactly.
So, and that's kind of where my distrust and dislike for polls came. And I think when you do that, you create situations where people don't go out and vote. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we could sit here all day and say Trump's going to win by 10%, some Trump voters are going to be like, I don't need to go vote then.
Right. And I think in large parts, right, the way our entire political system is structured doesn't actually do a good job of capturing accurate representation of what the people want and or need, whether it be the Electoral College or the numerous other things, right? But you said you were a believer in the Constitution, so to go back to, right, why should someone pay taxes if they're not going to get equal and accurate representation?
When you pay tax, what do you mean? Because you still get a vote. You
He's
still
talking
get your
about he's
representation.
talking about Puerto Rico.
I'm
Puerto
talking about
Rico?
Puerto Rico, and I'm talking about other people who, in these ID strict states, who maybe just haven't taken the steps to get the ID for whatever myriad of reasons, but then pay their taxes and don't get representation.
Let's assume we're in, for the sake of James's mental thought or mental picture.
Well
Let's
being.
let's presume that this perfect voter that is being misrepresented or underrepresented is doing everything right. It's just like, say it's like a single mom who works two jobs, Reba, and
Yeah, and has
she
three
just
kids and
can't
can't take
get
the
to the
time off.
yeah, she can't get to the DMV. Maybe she can't afford a laptop, so she can't get on the internet and order an ID. So like in that scenario, let's assume that that's your perfect demographic, and then states territories like Puerto Rico and Guam that are, they have income tax, federal income tax. They pay into the federal system, but they all they have is a couple reps in the House of Representatives. I'll let you.
And all of the federal law that supersedes their local law unless it's not applicable, which I looked, there was not a good definition of what makes something not applicable.
Right. Floor's yours.
So for those situations, they should have representation. I believe that. I don't know where, like you said it was Guam and
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Yeah, U.S.
They should have
territories.
representation
Right. They don't.
wholeheartedly. I think they should. I mean, I'm not arguing that they shouldn't. When it comes to Reba, um, it's one of those things where we have to find a way to make it available for them to do
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And I'm not saying today's world is perfect. I'm not saying voter IDs are perfect, right? Like voter ID laws are perfect right now. What I'm saying is I'm pro that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going to have a hard time trying to find something that I believe that the government's doing that is running perfect at all,
Right.
ever. So I think we got to find ways to make it available.
Yes.
Um, Chances are, if she has a job, though, she has an ID, right?
I mean,
Potentially
I
not.
maybe
She
when
could
she
wait
got the
tables
job, she might have
under the
lost it.
table.
Yeah, she could be waiting
Yeah,
tables under
Any
the.
number of things.
Yeah.
yeah, under the table, yeah.
She
So,
could work in a podunk town where they pay in cash and don't care, like the middle of nowhere, Louisiana.
Or
but even then,
maybe she has an ID
if they're
that's
paying
expired.
cash, she's not paying taxes.
That's true. Well, she's paying taxes on her purchases,
On all of her goods,
Yeah,
she's still paying taxes. She's
and
just
I
not
and
paying
her
income
and
tax.
the property taxes lumped in with her rent.
Correct.
yeah. So we need to find ways for those people to vote. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying anything's perfect right now, but what I am saying is I think we should have a system in place that is not only feasible for somebody to obtain and be able to go vote. I know in New York State, you are permitted 2 hours of paid time off to go vote.
Mm-hmm.
That is a law.
Yes.
So
Does that
maybe,
depend on the size of your employer?
No,
no,
it is a law.
it
Okay.
is a law. It's the right to vote. I think that needs to be, I don't know if it's federal. I haven't looked into that, but I know that is in New York State a law. That needs to be a federal law because you need to encourage voting. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm a bad representation of this because I'm voting for my dog this year. But you can't, you, there's so many things that are part of being an American. Jury duty, voting, like those are all key things. Those are, I mean, jury duty doesn't feel like a right, it feels like a punishment, but it is afforded to you. You know, it's your civil duty, as they say. You should make every attempt possible. And I don't care if it's, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, don't care if you're a freaking anarchist or whatever. I don't care if you're Antifa, for example. You have that right to vote. You should utilize that right. We need to make it available for everybody to do. That being said, there are safeguards that need to be put in place because of the amount of illegal immigration we do have to this country. I don't think if you're in this country illegally or you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be voting.
I mean,
Plain and simple.
it's a negligible. I mean, I agree, but it's such a. I mean, it's less than a percent of a percent. So it to make legislation around that is trivial.
Right, and the amount of people that brings into account so many other issues of how hard it is to get citizenship in this country. But I digress. The states requiring voting leave to be granted are Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. 28. And the District of Columbia.
Fuck DC. Realistically, the voting day should be a national holiday. It really should. Should be a paid day off for
I mean, but
everybody.
that doesn't. There's still jobs that are going to require people to work. Like my job. Well, not my job currently, but the organization in which I work. The It doesn't matter holidays. You got to have staff there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? You're still going to have those jobs, but what I think would be beneficial is making polling stations places where those essential people frequently go. You know what I'm
You
saying?
mean
Like
like having the polling station at a fire hall?
at a fire hall or a hospital, because then every nurse and doctor in there is going to be able to run down and vote real quick. You know, because voting usually isn't like once you get your ballot, it isn't a very time consuming process. I feel like people going in mostly already know who they're voting for, and you shouldn't. To be honest with you, if you don't know who you're voting for, you should be doing research before you even step foot into the building.
Agreed.
Bro,
Um,
can I just interject real quick? Cause I got something off my chest. I was listening to a
yeah,
podcast and they were interviewing this kid who was an undecided voter, and I say kid because he's 22 years old. He legitimately said, and I quote, "I guess I'll just vote for whoever I feel like when I pick up the pen."
That's terrifying. And I will say, James, in more populated counties compared to Jefferson County, for example, there are more polling places. So instead of getting in separate lines based on your district, each district has its own polling place. And it's typically within a few miles from where you live.
yeah. There's tons of polling places here.
Yeah, dude. If India can carry a poll box up a fucking mountain, because by law you have to have a polling station within 1.5 miles. If they can carry a poll station up a mountain to get to a really remote village, we can ensure access to polling stations for every single person in this country.
Right.
Mhm.
And then that only brings up, right, what about the situation where the polling boxes aren't accurately protected? And was it in Washington that hundreds of votes were burnt in a polling box?
That was actually in Vancouver, the Canadian elections.
Oh, okay.
There was one in Georgia as well.
Yep.
They caught the guy and arrested him today. He hold on, where's I was hold on, I had this article pulled up because I was reading about it because it was I was kind of intrigued when they caught him to see what his reasoning was going to be.
I can assure you it wasn't good.
It was interesting to say the least.
Oh, I'm
I just
sure.
want to make sure I got this right. So there's Oregon, Washington.
Mhm.
Please stop to kill the time. I figure this out.
The New York Rangers are down 2-1.
Yankees are
think
down 3-0.
the other thing that
It's not even 8 o'clock
also
yet.
negatively impacts voting numbers is the fact that we still utilize a two-party system.
Yeah, voter apathy is a real problem.
Yeah,
Real
because
fucking problem.
I can speak. I know of someone who I don't think is going to vote simply because their belief of what we as a country should do regarding the Israel and Palestinian war that is currently going on, and because there have been no real attempts at addressing that issue according to that person, they probably likely won't vote. And there are plenty of people who are voting just out of fear of opposition, or in other words, voting for one person because they're more afraid of the other, even if they don't think that person they're voting for has their best interest and values at mind while running the country.
True.
Here it is. So, it was in Arizona.
Mm.
Dieter Klofkorn, 35. He got arrested, and he said it was not politically motivated. Oh, this isn't the right guy. Anyways, the guy who they arrested said it wasn't politically motivated. He knew he was getting arrested. He wanted to get arrested. That's why he did it.
Right. And in that, why not do something else to get yourself arrested that doesn't negatively impact someone else's constitutional protected right?
I honestly think he was looking for a federal offense, longer
Sure.
charge.
It's not hard to get a federal offense. There's a long list of things you can do. That might have been the fastest and the easiest.
Yeah, and I think they said he was a homeless man. So I think he was looking for shelter more than anything.
Right, which speaks to a
Which,
whole other list of problems that there are plenty of people who are homeless who have a constitutional right to vote that will not be afforded one because they typically don't have identification. If you don't have an address, getting identification is next to impossible.
yeah, and I'm like I said, I'm not saying it's perfect, but we've got to find a way to do that, in my opinion. Um,
Now, can I ask you another question just because we're simply on the
yes.
topic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that foreign fraud in an election is a larger issue than domestic fraud in a presidential election?
I think any fraud is a problem. I
I don't disagree with
I
you.
don't
I think
I don't know.
any
I don't know
fraudulent
like
activity is an issue.
yeah, no, I 100% believe in that. I don't it's the same like this is let me all right, I'm going to say this and it's going to sound like it's a stretch, but you'll get what I'm saying. I think any type of fraud in any election is wrong in the same way that I think terrorism is wrong. I don't care if you're a natural born citizen and your reasons for doing it. Domestic terrorism is just as bad as overseas terrorism. You know what I'm saying? Like when it comes to our elections, we need to eliminate any way for there to be fraudulent activity. And I understand it may be a small part, it may not affect it that much, but I feel like we're we're getting a lot of people are becoming unrested and they're being pushed to for the right for example with the mail-in ballots and stuff there were a lot of questions with it. There was the ability to defraud a mail-in ballot is there, so people did not trust it, and that opened up the door for people like Trump to say, oh, it was stolen from me. people who go in there with that preconceived notion that it's not exactly the safest way to do it. And I understand why they did it because of COVID. Like 100% makes sense, cool, whatever. But that's where I feel like a lot of people who I talk to who have common sense got an emotional charge from that because there were questions about it. You know what I'm saying? So even if it's taking care of a small part, even if it's taking care of 1%, I feel like doing that will help prevent people from going further and further to their sides. Because once you create that distaste of, like, I know a lot of people who voted for Trump, and even during Trump's presidency, would talk to people on the left, would have family members on the left, they talk about politics and stuff. And then after that election, they felt like they were robbed because of the questions that came with the mail in balloting and all that stuff. So they've been pushed more and more to the right. Again, I see that as a problem because now you're using emotion instead of logic. And now you're creating somebody who's now a useful idiot for the right that 4 years ago had common sense. You know what I'm saying? I feel like it would bring comfort to a lot of people, even if it is a small amount, solve that problem. Again, how we solve that problem, there's so much nuance that an hour isn't enough to sit down and actually get in deep with these details. But I just feel like we can prevent a lot of people from going extreme. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just kind of where I was getting at is, you know, I don't know. Our political landscape today is disgusting. It's not at all what the founding fathers intended, and it sickens me. And that's why I'm glad we're doing this. I'm glad we're having these discussions. And I'm glad we're going to bring outside people in to actually have discussions with us too. Um, but that's just where I'm at. We can sit here all day and go back and forth about, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? But at the end of the day, what's good for one may not be good for another.
Right.
So we need to, instead of, because I get the political emails, I get the text message, I get the phone calls. We need to stop fighting with each other and work together for a solution. And I feel like the polarization that's happening is not allowing that. And I don't know how the fuck we got here. But
Lots of missteps in various locations,
yeah,
for lack of a better way to put it.
Ronald Reagan.
I mean, Reaganomics certainly didn't help us
You
not
know,
get to
but
that point.
fun fact today, obviously you mentioned immigration. I learned today that the current immigration situation could have been completely avoided in 1965, but the Congress left in a loophole that they presumed wasn't going to be taken advantage of that allowed. So, officially still on the docket, we only allow 375,000 immigrants in per year, and they have to be in the right categories, like stuff that we need, high skill individuals. And
Seeking political asylum or
yeah, well, no, I mean that's completely different. This is just regular immigration, and so, but they wrote in a clause in 1965 that that didn't count family members in that number. So basically, people would come over, and then you'd accept the 375,000, right? And then you'd add another 375,000, but those 375,000 that came last year want their mom and their dad and their brother and their sister here now. So that 375,000 turned into 1.2 million, turned into 4 million, turned into 6 million, all because
The
of this.
NPR politics podcast. You listened to the Today episode? Is that what that was?
Well, I listened to the Daily.
Oh, because
Yeah.
that was also their 52-minute episode for today,
Yeah.
which I also listened to.
Yeah. I listened to it. Yep.
And the other thing that's sorry, continue.
No. You're good. So like that's one of the things. Like, there's simple fixes we could make that we're just not doing.
Well, and the other part of these simple fixes, right, is that even the founding fathers, right, if we're going back to the Constitution and all the other things, didn't want a two-party system.
No.
They viewed them as dangerous factions threatening to the legacy of the revolution and harmful to the ideals of good government and national interest. And this is pulled from the National Archives.
Yeah, they're terrible, and I
Right.
think I quite frankly, and I've said this multiple times. I think I've even said it on this podcast already, that I am a parliamentarian. I believe that a parliamentary system is a better form of democracy. Sue me if you think I'm fucking crazy, but I just think when you force multiple political parties to have to work together to form a majority in government, a lot more gets done.
Honestly, you know what I would like to see? No party at all.
It's never gonna happen.
You run solely, I know, but you should be running solely based on what you believe because we get too many people that, like, say,
Pander?
yeah, well, not even that. Like, say I ran, right? I run independent, free of everybody, right? I can work with both sides. You're not limited to what your party wants. You know what I'm saying? So we can, like, for example, Travis, we live in a red county.
Yeah.
It's not going to change, never has. If I run as a Republican, well, now I'm getting help from the Republican Party, the RNC. These people are funneling me money, right? I get in, and now they're saying, all right, we gave you money. You got to vote with us on this. That's not how politics is supposed to be.
No.
That's not
And
actual representation of anybody. Because as a Republican, there are a lot of things that I look at Republican policy and I go, I don't like that. I don't like that. And it is what it is. But again, me getting into politics will never happen because, at least not on a federal or a national scale, because I'm not going to sell out my beliefs for money or for whatever. And a lot of, even when I elect my representative, it's based solely on who I agree more on policy.
yeah.
So, if we had, say, Tulsi Gabbard stayed with the Democrat Party and she ran against Donald Trump and she came out and she said, I'm for gun rights and small government. I'm not voting Republican on that. I'm not voting for Trump solely based on the fact that I don't like Trump, but there's that policy there that I can agree with. So that's how people should vote. And I feel like too many people go in and vote party line because they don't want to educate themselves
Yeah.
or because
But
that's what they're told to do.
that also throws me further into the parliamentary system, because when you have 56 parties, you have to do your do your research, because you can't just ride the party line. There might not even be a member of your party per se running for office. If you're a labor person, it might be the the Workers Party, or it might be the Democrat Party, or it might be the Liberal Party. Like, there's coalitions that occur, and when people are broken up and they're that segmented, they're much more likely to work together because one side doesn't have all the power. For example,
Right.
I don't know. Obviously, I don't know how much you guys pay attention to international politics, but I'm a fucking dork, and I do. Iceland just completely dissolved their government. Well, not yet, but they announced they're going to. because the prime minister, they were trying to push legislation through. The coalition fell apart. They no longer had a majority coalition, so the prime minister went to the president and declared, basically requested a dissolution of government. And what that means, by the way, is that all of them lose their jobs. They have to run again to get their jobs, and a new coalition must be formed. And so it forces politicians to work and constantly progress and make legislation and do things, because if not, then they're going to dissolve the government and they're going to lose their job. We don't have any powers like that in the United States. There's no way for us to, quite frankly, people say, and like Bernie Sanders kind of pissed me off, but in his debate, he was like, I don't agree with term limits because I think we all have term limits. My term limit is the election. If you don't like me, vote me out. But when there's a two-party system and they're funneling billions of dollars into the election, and people also don't, it's like you said, they vote along party lines. They don't want to educate themselves. That's the reason why some shitbag like Ted Cruz continuously gets elected in Texas over and over and over and over again, because the Republicans aren't going to run somebody else, and they're not going to lose the votes because people just don't even pay attention. They just vote for Ted Cruz because he has an R next to his name. And if you had a parliamentary process, when the government wasn't getting, for instance, when they had the shutdown that Ted Cruz pushed, guess he would have lost his fucking job, because they would have dissolved the government and been like, no, fuck you, we're done. Good luck going to get new jobs now or get elected again, because you just caused the dissolution of government and now we're stuck here. And that's why I'm big on that. I'm literally rock hard about the idea of government just dissolving overnight and being like, hey, we're not getting shit done, so we're going to have an election in April because these guys are fucking assholes. That's sick. I love that. Let's do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it certainly has power directed more towards the people, in that everyone gets to vote for the leaders of their party, and their party really has their best interest in mind. I think the other problem we run into often in this country is we have career politicians when it was never meant to be that way. It was meant to be a public service position in which the most educated people in their respective fields were the ones having input.
And we weren't supposed to vote for senators either. People don't know that.
Nope.
The senators were supposed to be voted for by the state legislature.
And let me correct myself, not having input, but right, it was meant for well-educated people to serve their country in a public service position and then go about their regular career afterwards.
Right. We say term, and people think like, oh, well, that's just the election cycle. The original term for term was that you served your 2 or 6 years and then you were done. You didn't have to do it again, because it was like a military contract.
It was like jury duty.
Yeah, you did it and you're done. And now people just keep doing it over and 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 over again. And don't even get me started on the Supreme Court. Anyways, we are coming up on an hour. I think
though, if you look at, sorry,
no, you're good. Go ahead, get it out.
Just real quick. Even if you keep the same election the way it is,
yep,
but take money out of it.
Public funded elections is like my biggest thing.
Because right now, we live in a world where if I wanted to run for congressman,
you couldn't, because you don't have.
I don't need money. Well, yeah, but if you take money out of it, what I need is a social media page and live town halls.
Yep.
Talk to people, because, and that's the thing. Like,
that's not the reality for most people. You nor I nor Travis could never run for an office without winning the lottery.
Never say never.
It is very unlikely that any of the three of us could run for an office without winning the lottery.
I'm announcing my candidacy for New York State District, fucking whatever district we are. I think District 43, assembly seat.
Oh, they just redid it.
Assembly seat against Scott Gray. I will lose.
More power to you.
I'll get pummeled, but I'm fucking so mad.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I feel like if you have enough, if you can get word of mouth out, you can do a lot now.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not buying commercials and shit. But if I'm running, I'll go sit down with people who disagree with me. I'll go sit down with local law enforcement agencies. I'll go sit down with whoever and talk to them. But again, you can't do that now because of the lack of civil discourse that's being allowed in this country.
Yep.
I mean, every time somebody says, how many times I've been called a Nazi just because I said I'm Republican? You know what I'm saying? And like, oh, let your opinions be known. Um,
You know how many times I've been
it's,
called a libtard?
oh, I hate that so much.
Or a
But
snowflake.
like, you, you have, you're just not allowed. Like, it is reprogrammed in humans' minds, and you see this after the Trump election, that if you vote the other way, or you believe this, or you believe that, you your friends, your family and stuff, they stop talking to you. I know, like, I have family who've stopped talking to me because of politics. Hopefully it was short-lived, but I watch, I'm not going to get into specifics, but a family member of mine stopped talking to someone who she had been best friends with since she was kids because they had a disagreement on politics and it got heated. That's not what the intentions, that's not what politics is supposed to be, and that's not a old thing. This is all relatively new,
Yeah.
So it blows my mind that people just sit there and constantly let that division and let that type of political landscape encapsulate who we are as humans. And it kind of makes me lose faith in humanity, for being honest.
Well, that's inevitably what's going to happen. You're going to lose faith because I I blame social media, but humanity's devolving. But I'm not going to get on that fucking train. We did a really good job tonight. I'm actually
Right, that's a different episode for a different time.
we did a really good job tonight. I think we've made our points clear. Is there anything that you guys would like to say before we sign off?
I mean, I just think there's a lot of flaws in the system, and arguably we need a lot of restructuring that I am maybe painfully optimistic will happen at some point. I don't know if I'll be alive to see it, but I think there's a lot of systemic change that needs to happen for any of this to be really viable.
True. James?
Are you fucking kidding me? Sorry.
My assumption is that it wasn't about the systemic change. Did the Yankees let someone get a home run?
Yeah, it's 2-0.
Freddie Freeman should have 2-run.
Okay.
Sorry. I just want to say, nice chat tonight, guys. It was nice talking to you. Thoughts and prayers preemptively going out to Oklahoma, Missouri, all the areas that are probably going to be affected tomorrow by really bad severe weather. Stay safe. And that's all.
And I'm going to close it out with get the fuck out and vote.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Yep.